All right, everyone. Today I figured we'd talk some more about research review. So this study is pertinent to what I've been talking about the last few weeks with the aquatic orders of insects. So this is the ephemeroptera. This was a study that was published just in May of this year, 2024, and it comes out of the Netherlands. And it is tracking ephemeroptera abundance and species abundance and richness in streams across the southern and eastern portions of the Netherlands. For those of you who aren't aware, a lot of the macroinvertebrates that you find in fresh water, so macroinvertebrates are usually talking about like crustaceans and insects, and then some of the freshwater clams and things. The macroinvertebrates are really good at being signifiers for stream health. And the reason for this is that many of them are extremely sensitive to chemicals, not both artificial chemicals and organic pollutants like wastewater and sewage. So it's not just things that are coming out of like manufacturing areas, but also sewage leaks or fertilizer leaks from farms, both organic fertilizers and chemical fertilizers. They are the first groups of animals in the water to die and to disappear from entire regions. But also, as generally speaking, once the water is improved enough, they are the first things to show back up. Because many of the insects, for instance, because they have flying stages, they can colonize large areas and kind of invade these streams and rivers that are now healthy. So a lot of entomologists spend time, a lot of entomologists that work with aquatic insects specifically, spend time doing aquatic surveys for stream health and things like that, wetlands health, because these insects are so useful at helping to monitor those sorts of things. So that's what they were doing in the Netherlands. This was an enormous study. It has 41 years of data. They collected data between from 1980 to the end of 2020. So they had an enormous amount of data where they collected insects or collected all sorts of invertebrates throughout the year, and then took all of the data for the ephemeroptera and both compared their abundances and species richness across all these streams, and then modeled the recovery over time. And the reason for this is that back in the 70s, in both the US and in Europe, people started to take water quality much more seriously as far as human impacts on the environment. So this data began being collected in 1980 because of that. And generally speaking, the West has done a pretty good job of improving water quality. The issue has been that in some of these areas, although we're not necessarily dumping all the pollutants that we used to, and we have better sewage protocols and things like that, many of these streams, depending on how fast the water moves, what is the slope of the stream, stuff like that, they still accumulate a lot of pretty noxious chemicals or fertilizers or wastes, and so those sorts of streams don't recover very well and haven't recovered very well. And that's kind of what they found in this, is that a lot of these fast-moving streams and stuff like that seem to recover quite a bit, but some of the lowland areas not so much. So part of the concern with like the waste is and the other organic pollutants is you would think, well, it's organic, doesn't that mean it's good? And they do cause kind of an outgrowth of life, but the issue is that you get all these algae and cyanobacteria and stuff like that growing in these streams, and if it's particularly stagnant, the growth of all these bacteria and the algae and some of the plants will get so severe that they'll suck all the nutrients out of the water, they'll suck all the oxygen out of the water, and they'll just kill everything involved. So you really have to be sensitive to the amount of organic pollutants in a lot of these waters. So even though we've removed a lot of the industrial pollutants, there's still quite a bit of organic pollutants. So they looked at this for 41 years, and they originally had a list of 52 species, ephemeroptera species, that occurred in this region. These are the regions in the south and east of the Netherlands that they were working in. They had 52 ephemeroptera, and unfortunately, many of them had already gone extinct by the time that this survey started collecting data. So before 1980, 13 of the species had already gone extinct. And then by 1985, another 2 species had gone extinct in the region. And then luckily 2 more, which they thought were extinct, ended up being reintroduced into the area. They invaded from either Germany or Belgium, or the bordering countries. But generally, what the trend that they found is after 1980, when people started taking this this river health, stream health more seriously, they did see an overall increase in abundance of the ephemeroptera, but then it stagnated pretty hard after 1998. And so a lot of this research was trying to talk about why they think this happened, and that's kind of what I've been talking about. With yes, we've controlled a lot of the industrial pollutants, and so the things that were sensitive to the industrial pollutants came back. Because these pollutants were no longer in the water, but the species that died back because they were sensitive to the organic pollutants or the sewage or whatever have not recovered very well. And so depending on what region of the country you're in, you may not be seeing this recovery of ephemeroptera. The other interesting thing that they briefly mentioned, but they don't talk about quite a bit, is ephemeroptera in general have a hard time re-invading streams that they've been pushed out of, that they've all died off in, so that a species has trouble coming back, even if some of the water quality is improved, and that it would allow them to live there. And the reason for this is that ephemeroptera generally disperse best in their aquatic stage. So they're really good at dispersing downstream or downriver and repopulating downstream, because if the adults lay all their eggs upstream and downstream, let's say the population got wiped out because of pollutants being pumped into the water downstream, once that clears out, the ones upstream will drift downstream and they'll repopulate the whole area. And although ephemeroptera can fly, the adult stage, which is the flying stage, generally only lives for maybe a couple hours to a couple days. So the problem is how far can they really disperse in maybe 2 days when, while they're alive for those 2 days, they're basically just concerned with mating. They're not flying, tens or hundreds of miles or anything like that. So they're not great dispersers in the adult stage. So once a stream has been completely depopulated of a specific species, it may take a very long time for that species to be able to move back into that stream. So that can help explain some of this stagnation effect. Again, this chart here is just showing more of that stagnation. But there is the extinctions that they maybe weren't expecting does show some historical context here, which is that a lot of this damage was done post Second Industrial Revolution, which occurred in the 1800s. And so a lot of these species that were known from the various parts of the Netherlands had been wiped out during the period between the 1800s and 1980, when no one was really looking at these sorts of region-wide species surveys. And so that damage can't really be undone yet. So this would require, finding hopefully that the species exists in a neighboring country, but maybe it's permanently extinct. We don't know, and it would require more significant and purposeful introductions, because ephemeroptera are not great at flying dispersal. The other thing that this study points out is that although the wastewater acts and the clean water acts and things like that, which have limited the amount of pollutants going into the water, have been great, and there have been general improvements in most of the regions, this may not be enough for some of the more sensitive species, and that what really needs to happen are specific stream restoration programs And there have been some. They did have one stream restoration program going on while the study was going on. At least one that did show improvements for some of these more sensitive species. Some of these species have very narrow restrictions on what sorts of environments they can live in. And so you do need to be able to restore some of these streams to their more natural state before these species come in. It's not just a pollution issue, it's also a degradation of the environment in general issue. This was a very interesting study. It definitely gives some hope for environmental restoration practices, although this was obviously a huge study that took 40 years, 40 plus years to get all of their data, and I'm sure it had an enormous number of participants collecting all this data because the ephemeroptera had to be collected by hand. It's a very interesting, worthwhile study to read. I will link the article. This is an open source or open access article from Science of the Total Environment, so you can download it and read it yourself if you'd like. And I'm sure there's more in there that I didn't get into that you can pick apart yourself, or you can leave comments on it. And I'll talk to you then. Thanks.